I thought of the days immediately following the assassination of President Kennedy, when President Johnson was having some meetings with some of his friends and advisors to decide what he would recommend to the Congress and the order of priorities. And I remember the discussion of the Civil Rights Bill. It then appeared that there was no real possibility that the Civil Rights Bill would get through the Congress. But there was a discussion of whether the President Johnson, should nevertheless urge the Congress to enact the Civil Rights Bill as the first item on his agenda. And one of the men at the conference said, Mr. President, I don't think you ought to do this. There's no chance that the bill will pass. You should not lay the prestige of the presidency on the line. And Johnson said, and I'll never forget this, if I shouldn't lay it on the line, what's the presidency for? And that came to me last night, along with a lot of very personal and very warm memories.
How do you think that President Johnson would like to be remembered? Do you think for this Civil Rights Bill, generally as a president, I think very close to the people? What do you think he'd be like to be remembered for?
I think that's right. I think there's no doubt about it. He once said, it does not really matter what historians will write of me. What really matters is whether the people of this country live a little better because I was here. That's what he was interested in.
President Lyndon Johnson will be remembered as one of America's greatest statesmen. He was a loyal vice president to President Kennedy, and President Kennedy had a respect and an admiration for Lyndon Johnson. I think all Americans remember very well the extraordinary efforts and leadership that he provided for this country in the area of civil rights, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Civil Rights Act, to really make the guarantees of the American Constitution a reality for all Americans. His leadership in the war on poverty to fight the problems of disease and the oppressed and the poor in this country will long be a symbol of America's obligation and responsibility to the less fortunate of this nation. And the spirit of equality and compassion that was so well dramatized in the words, "We shall overcome," will remain in the hearts and minds of Americans for future generations.
I think the country's lost a really dedicated man. I know he was unhappy about his tenure of office. I know that he wanted to do more than he did. And I know he was hamstrung mainly by his refusal to get rid of holdovers from the Kennedy regime. I think Lyndon Johnson has been a greatly misunderstood man. He was a man of power, and frankly, if we had leadership such as he gave us, if we had it today, I think the Congress would be better. I'm not belittling the leadership of the majority leader, but I think we would be getting more things done if we had a Lyndon Johnson in charge. I've lost a very good friend, a man that I've enjoyed being with. And as I said last night, the only thing good about it, we can look forward to going to heaven now and having a fellow we can argue with and enjoy it.
Mrs. Humphfrey and I mourn the loss of a very dear friend, just as the nation mourns the loss of a remarkable man and a leader who struggled to bring dignity and hope to all of the American people. Lyndon Johnson's public life, as we know, was filled with controversy. I believe so, above all, because he was a man who acted and he cared, and he was a man of decision. He will be remembered most kindly by those who society had forgotten or ignored. He was a strong man who cared for the weak and for the sick. He was a school teacher who dedicated his public career to the cause of education for every American. He was a man of compassion for the elderly and of concern for the young. I believe that no man gave more to the struggle for human rights, nor asked more of us in the battle against racism and discrimination than President Johnson. And he was a president who saw America as a guardian of freedom, and he acted accordingly. Above all, Lyndon Johnson believed in this country. He believed that our country could build a society of opportunity and of justice for all. He drew strength and understanding and purpose from his dear wife, Lady Bird Johnson, and his devoted family. And to them we convey our sympathy, and with them we share a great loss.
How ironic and how fitting it is that these brave lunar explorers should share our feelings today, because their own heroic adventures depended to a large extent on Lyndon Johnson's dedicated and successful commitment to the space program. How ironic and how saddening it is that Lyndon Johnson should die so close to a day that we hope will bring us at last to peace in Vietnam. That a Southerner, a man whose personal style was so often ridiculed, should be hailed as the greatest champion of civil rights since Lincoln. Like all Americans throughout our country today, those of us in the National Aeronautics and Space Administration are very deeply saddened by the loss of the true architect of our nation's space program, former President Lyndon B. Johnson. Long before he entered the White House, long before he provided our nation with his great leadership, while he was still in the Senate, Mr. Johnson had true visions of the promise of space. He had the foresight and he had the courage to accept the challenge of the future. And he supported this challenge with the zeal and with the determination so typical of the character of Lyndon Baines Johnson.